I'm so happy to be here, and thank you all for coming. I love Singapore because I feel like this is one of the places that's the epicenter on earth of people who are truly interested in what we want, what we know about learning, and what we're finding from research about learning. So it just tickles my heart to come every time to Singapore. And I hope you can forgive me if you might have seen some of these slides before. I'm trying to present material that can be good for everyone, even the young children that are among us. So to begin with, I'd just like to give you a little sense of my own background in case you might have missed that before. Let's see, come back here. Let's see, there we go. So I grew up moving around the US. By the time I was about 15 years old, I'd lived in 10 different places. But the thing is, mathematics is really sequential. So if you fall off anywhere along the way, it's hard to get back on. And when I was, let's see if this pointer, yes, it works. Okay, so I was living in Texas. I was 7 years old. I spoke just like this. And then suddenly we moved to Massachusetts, and they were far ahead of me in the multiplication tables. So I just thought, I guess, I can't seem to catch up. I must not have the math gene, and I gave up and flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science, which really is ironic since I'm here as a distinguished professor of engineering, and I love math and science. So one day, one of my engineering students found out about my sordid past as a math flunky, and he said, "How did you change your brain?" And I thought about it, and I remembered what I was like as this formerly cute little kid. And I loved animals and weaving and things like that. But I knew I could never grow up and do anything technical. And so I thought, well, what can I do? I wanted to learn another language. So I found, my father was like, learn another language? That's not really going to give you a good marketable skill, because in the US, of course, everybody speaks one language. And so I thought I outsmarted him. I found out there was a way to get and learned another language and get paid for learning another language, and that was to join the Army. And I told my father, I'm going to join the Army. And he said, oh boy, you are really going to learn something, all right. So that is me looking really nervous because I am so clumsy and that grenade could have fallen so easily. But I did learn another language. I randomly picked Russian. It's been уже 40 лет с тех пор, как я говорила по-русски. It's been over 40 years since I've spoken Russian. But if I have a little vodka, it comes back. So I ended up working out on Soviet trawlers up in the Bering Sea. I just loved having new adventures and seeing the world through different lenses. So I also ended up at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, and that's me. I am actually looking really kind of cold. And that's, of course, where I met my husband. So I say I had to go to the end of the earth to meet that man. Now, I went south to meet my husband, and my daughter went south to Chile, where she met her husband. And now the rule in our family is do not let the women go south. So I had done everything people told me to do. I had followed my passion, learned a language really well, and found that I had put myself in this kind of career box I mean, my friends who were West Point engineers in the Army, they were getting good job offers as they were leaving the military. But here I was, 26 years old, and no recruiter was knocking on my door going, we just got to have your Slavic languages and literature skills. But at the same time, don't get me wrong, learning a language is what set me on the pathway to being here today. Learning how to learn a language disciplines the mind in a special way. So I decided, though, that I had somehow been blocking the idea. I was locking myself into this career box by thinking that I couldn't change my specialty and what I could learn. So I decided to try and see if I could learn in math and science. So at age 26, I left the military and I went to the university, started at the lowest possible level of remedial high school algebra, and slowly began climbing my way upwards. It was not easy, but if I'd known then what I now know about learning, I could have made it so much easier on myself. I remember one day sitting there, spending and more than an hour staring at a page that I wasn't going to turn it until I understood what was on that page. I then accidentally flipped the page. Suddenly all made sense to me. And I thought, why doesn't anybody teach us how to learn? And in fact, people today will go from 12 to 18 years of education and never have a course on how to learn effectively. This is amazing because we now know so much about how the brain actually learns that it's almost criminal not to be sharing this information with younger students who could really benefit from this, and with teachers who can teach more effectively knowing these ideas. Now today, I'm a professor of engineering at Oakland University, which is in Michigan, which is really cold. It is not Oakland, California, which is warm. And that's me on a typical February day. So here you can see the course that Terry Sanowski and I put together is Learning How to Learn. This is Terry, incidentally, on a typical winter day in La Jolla, California. But it turns out that I was invited to speak at Harvard, and I was so nervous. And when I walked into the room, I was even more nervous because it was packed, standing room only. And I thought, why are there so many people here? Well, it turns out this one little course, Learning How to Learn, had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's massive open online courses and online courses put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. So there we go. That's sort of my basement studio, a little bit expanded, and that's where we produce the course. And the thing that I want you to take away from this is the idea that when you are learning something, it's a physical activity. It's a physical activity that takes time. This guy did not sit there the night before some big world championship and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to cram tonight. It takes time to build that muscular structure. And muscular structure, as well as neural structure, they're excitable tissues. And it takes time to physically develop those tissues. So I'd like you to just know it's not all mush up there. And there are certain techniques that can help you build that neural structure of learning even more effectively. So we are in a day and age of generative AI now. And it's so seductive to kind of be using our cell phones, using our laptops, kind of letting ChatGPT do the work for us and so forth. But I want to give you just a little insight into what research has shown us about what these different devices, mechanisms can do to us. One research study showed that if you even, as a student, have your cell phone visible on the table, the desk in front of you, it reduces your cognitive capacity. In other words, you get dumber just by having that cell phone right there where you can see it. I see people pointing to their cell phones. And also, let's say that you go out to dinner with friends and you put that cell phone, oh, that was good timing. Thank you for that. Good time. Okay, well, I'll pay you later for that. But if you even have that cell phone on the table as you're eating with friends, you enjoy your dinner with friends less. Because part of you is kind of wondering, oh, am I going to get, am I getting a text message? Maybe TikTok's a little bit more fun than my friend Sam here. So it reduces your enjoyment of those you're with. Another study has shown, this is quite interesting, if you type on your laptop, so you're taking notes and typing, you do not learn as much as if you take notes by hand. You have to do cognitive processing if you are taking hand notes. So it can be really a better idea to close your laptop and take notes by hand. Another thing I have noticed, once, just for fun, I was speaking at a university to some students, and they assured me that they kind of needed a bit of allowance because they typed better, much better, and they had trouble with handwriting. So I said, okay. Unbeknownst to them, my husband went up behind and was looking at what was on the screens. Guess what? It wasn't taking notes. So if you are a professor, one thing you might consider is something that this professor considered doing and actually did in his class. He wrote an op-ed about it. He asked his students to put away their cell phones and to close their computers and write by hand through that semester. To his surprise, his students got a full grade higher on the average for the course than they ever had before. So, if you are a professor, consider asking your students to close their laptops and put away their cell phones, and you might be surprised at how it can really help you. I know that students in Singapore often feel just overwhelmed with things, with all the material you're expected to learn. But what that does mean is when you're trying to learn something, don't try to do two things at once or don't be distracted. Make the most of it so that you can go out and meet with friends later on. Now, since this is sort of an era of generative AI, I want to give you a little sense of the history of generative AI. Now, in 2017, a paper was published in a conference called the Neural Information Processing Systems Conference. That paper was Attention is All You Need. The conference is the biggest conference in all of AI. This year it had around 18,000 registrants for it. When registration opens, typically it fills in less than 10 minutes. So if you want to go to an AI conference, go to that one, but be sure to be ready to sign up quickly when registration opens. Now, this paper was submitted to the 2017 conference, and Terry Sinowski is the president of this conference, my co-instructor in learning how to learn. And Terry mentioned to me, he said, you know, when they submitted this paper, we thought it was a nothing burger. We didn't think it was important at all, so we relegated it off to a corner to be given by grad students. Turns out this paper is so important, it has now been cited over 150,000 times because it introduced the idea of the transformer. And transformers simply have an encoder where you feed in the prompt and a decoder where your output comes out of the prompt. What we're really interested in here is that the flow of information through a transformer in AI is remarkably similar to the flow of information through the human brain, which is no surprise because neuroscientists and AI experts have been working hand in hand through the summers and winters of AI development in order to understand each of these two fields. But this means if we understand a little bit more about how the brain learns, we can use AI more effectively, and vice versa. So let's kind of peer into the human brain. If we look, the brain has one kind of fundamental building block, at least for our purposes, and that's the neuron. There's 86 billion neurons in the brain, but to better understand a neuron, let's use my friendly space alien as a metaphor. The space alien here, he's got 3 legs, and those legs are analogous to dendrites on real neurons. And it's got these little toes. Those are analogous to dendritic spines. And then it's got an axon, an arm that reaches out. And what these neurons like to do is they like to reach out and more or less tickle the toe of an adjoining neuron, which means they are, in a sense, they're simply sending signals, mostly electrical. There's a little neurotransmitter as it jumps that gap. And as we're learning something, again, it's a very physical thing. We're creating connections between neurons in long-term memory. And this is whether we're learning to take a derivative in math, or to conjugate a verb in a foreign language, do a dance step, play a musical instrument, whatever we're learning, we're simply making connections between neurons. Unfortunately, what we've often heard over the last 20, 30, 40 years is, you don't need to remember things. You can always just look it up. But you can't. If I say to you, for example, 12 times 12 is 298, does that feel right to you? Something's really wrong, I hope, and you feel that. Well, you can only feel that something's wrong if you have that information internalized inside you. In some countries where conceptual understanding is thought to be the golden key of learning, they think it's not necessary to learn the multiplication tables by heart, because you can always look it up. But now what they're finding is nursing students, for example, they can type 10 times 10 into a calculator, mistype a number, get 1,000 out, 10 times bigger than it should have been, and they'll be, looks good to me. And suddenly they can prescribe 10 times the medication dosage they should have been prescribing. So knowing things by heart has great value, especially in this day and age of AI. So how do you strengthen those connections? Well, you practice. Practice in a specific way. If you don't practice, well, your little synaptic janitor can kind of sweep those connections away. So ultimately, we want to have nice, strong sets of links in long-term memory, and that is what allows us to easily pull ideas, concepts, techniques, whatever we've learned, to mind whenever we might need it. Again, if we don't have those links in long-term memory, we can't think critically about AI. Now, one thing is, when we have those links in long-term memory, it can help us so that, like, when you were a little kid, okay, I shall be doting grandma here. You should see our little granddaughter. She gets into water and she's just like playing with it. And that's what you all did when you were young. And that allowed you to gradually gain a sense of what is the flow of water? How does current flow? And once you've got that idea of what current, what water, the flow of water is like, you can use that as a metaphor to more easily explain what the current, the flow of electricity is. So, you know, does the metaphor break down? Sure, at a quantum level it does. Every metaphor breaks down. If you read the book Models Behaving Badly by Emmanuel Derman, he will even say mathematical equations are simply metaphors that will break down eventually. But metaphors, when they are working, they really give you insight, and they give you insight quickly. I could have explained neurons in a way that really didn't stick with you and was kind of boring. But it's a lot more entertaining to think of neurons as being like space aliens, you know, that are transmitting those signals. So when I was working on the book A Mind for Numbers, it's, you know, when they came up with I didn't come up with the title for this book. Penguin came and told me, they said, you know, we're going to call your book A Mind for Numbers. And I thought, that is the most boring title for a book I've ever heard. And when I went and looked it up, you know where it is all over the place? Obituaries. Because, you know, they'll be like, Fred really had a mind for numbers. But this book has done so well. It's sold over 1 million copies, and I have to say, it's not because of me. It's because I reached out. Do you know this website called ratemyprofessors.com? So it has access. You can see all the top English-speaking professors in the world that are well known for their teaching. So I made a list of thousands of the top teaching professors in the world in all sorts of different subjects. And I emailed them all, and I asked them, do you want to see the manuscript for this book? Shocking percentages said, yeah, sure. And I got this great feedback. But there was one thing they told me that really surprised me. It was common to many of these professors. They said, there's one thing I do, and it is the magic that makes me seen as a great teaching professor. Now, what was that one thing? It was the use of metaphor and analogy, but they wouldn't tell the other professors about this. Why? because the other professors would laugh at them. They'd say, oh, that's why you're seen as such a great teacher. You just make things so easy for your students. But isn't that our job as professors, to help? I mean, learning is really, really hard. And anything that kind of can make it easier, can make it stick more naturally, is a good thing from my perspective. So I have found metaphor to be one of the most powerful tricks and tools for teaching well, and also for me to understand something that I find very difficult. Now, how can we come up with metaphors? Yeah, ChatGPT, that's it. It works so beautifully. Just go to ChatGPT, ask for a metaphor for, like, what if you're trying to explain the difference between main guard and scope in Python programming? Well, ask ChatGPT, and it will say it's like, main guard is like the gatekeeper of a castle, and scope is like the rooms within a castle, and it'll give you a lot more besides. And don't just ask for one metaphor. Ask for several metaphors. Ask for a metaphor involving a topic you find interesting or your students find interesting, and it will really be helpful for you. Ultimately, then, we want to remember that we need those links, however we get them, into our long-term memory, whether we get them through use of a metaphor or sort of by hook or crook and practice. The bottom line is, without those links in your own brain, you cannot think critically about AI. I'll give you another example. I have a friend, brilliant man, a professor, who wrote a book, actually did a lot of prompting on ChatGPT, and came up with a 260-page book. He gave me this book, and I have to say, it was the worst book I have ever read. It was boring, predictable, flat characters, really terrible dialogue. How could this very intelligent man give me something so horrible? Simple. As good writers will tell you, to become a good writer, you need to read, read, read. You need to get that body of knowledge about what good writing involves into your own head, and you can only really do that by a lot of reading. My friend was really good at his subject area, but he hadn't read broadly. He didn't know the genre. And so when ChatGPT gave him a book back, he thought it, he looked it over, thought it was really good, sent it off to me, and didn't know better because he didn't have links in his own brain. So I like to say, AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. Let's say that one together. AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. And that is so true. So now let's see how good you are. Okay, we're going to see. I know some of you will have read my books. You'll get the right answer, I hope. I'm going to give you 4 techniques for learning. You're going to pick one of them out that you think is the very best. We will vote on this. So the 4 techniques are rereading, or highlighting or underlining, or retrieval practice, recall, like using flashcards, or creating a concept map, like writing down the key concepts and how they relate to one another. You can vote only for one that you think is the best. So how many vote for rereading? Okay. How about highlighting or underlining? There's a brave soul. Yeah, a few brave souls. Okay, retrieval practice or recall. Okay, quite a few. And concept mapping. Oh, I'd say it's about even split between retrieval practice and concept mapping. Do you want to see what it is? Keep you in suspense. Okay, it is retrieval practice. And the reason is that as you first learn something, you're laying these weak links in your long-term memory, but each time you pull those links from your memory, your own memory, you're strengthening those links. I know some of you will be saying, but it's not higher Bloom's taxonomy levels of learning. It's just simple facts. That's actually not true at all. It depends on what kind of retrieval questions you ask yourself. If you say, what's the date of the French Revolution? You know, that's one date. If you ask yourself to compare and contrast the chief characteristics of the French and Russian revolutions, that's something you can be thinking about while you're going for an hour-long walk. In fact, Michael Nielsen, the physicist, would say he would retrieve the key ideas of a very difficult theorem in physics. He would bring it to mind each day and try to visualize the aspects as he was retrieving it. Do you know, over the weeks, as he was doing this, he came up with a new way of proving this theorem that was far simpler and more elegant than the previous method. So retrieval practice is not only for remembering simple facts, it helps build deep conceptual understanding, and this has been shown in hundreds and hundreds of papers. So you know how Martin Luther King had a dream? I, Barbara Oakley, have a dream. I dream that I will someday come to Singapore and I will ask this question and no one will raise their hand with concept mapping. One thing I do is I try to use some retrieval practice every day in my life. So just to kind of keep my saw sharpened and keep myself cognitively sharp, you can use a number of different, there's all sorts of flashcard systems like Kahoot, Anki, and so forth. I use one called smarterhumans.ai, and it's got a little web clipper. And what you can do is, like here, I've loaded it on my Coursera course. Look at this. You know what we did? We're redoing the videos for learning how to learn, and we're adding in all this really cool AI imagery. And we shot this originally in 2K. Now we're converting it to 4K. I look so young. It's so cool. So anyway, so I use this web clipper, and I can go I can either go to a video, like I am here, or I can load an electronic document. And then I just click this additional video actions, and this comes up, and look at that. Generate AI set of flashcards. And it will go ahead and generate a whole series of flashcards for that particular video or for the electronic document. I can edit them and save the ones I like and so forth. But I practice with maybe 15 to 20 flashcards in a day unless I'm busy traveling or something like that. And it helps keep me sharp. And what's really interesting is something I learned maybe a month ago, and I retrieved something, I happened to revisit that in my flashcards. All of a sudden I start thinking about it in a different way, because what I'm working on now relates to what I was going on about last month, but I see these new connections, and it's really quite helpful for my creativity. Now, another issue that I want to bring up relates to the brain's two different modes of learning. One of those modes is focus mode. It's like when you're focusing. Psychologists call this the task positive network. And there's the diffuse mode, which is like the mind wandering network or a task negative network. To better understand these two different modes, what will we use? My favorite tool. No. Well, besides ChatGPT. Metaphor, yes, okay. I see that, just like metaphor, yeah. So the metaphor we're going to use is that of a pinball machine. And that pinball machine works. You just pull back on a plunger, a ball goes bouncing around on a rubber bumper, on those rubber bumpers. That's how you get points. So we're going to put this pinball machine right on the human brain. So here we go. Okay, so there's our pinball machine on the brain. And here we go. Let's say I asked you to multiply 22 times 77. And your thoughts would move right along. You'd maybe do it in your head or pull out a sheet of paper and you'd solve the problem. So that's how you often work on something you're very familiar with. You can solve problems, new problems, but you're using what you already knew. But what if you didn't already know anything related to how to solve a new problem? Let's say you're a kid and your teacher explained to you how to do division that day, worked you through a problem and so forth, sent you home, and then you're sitting there alone trying to do your first division problem. So you sit there, and kind of what's happening is you're trying to lay links, but your mind keeps slithering back up to multiplication because it's easy, and that's what you're familiar with. And you can end up, you don't know how to lay those new links there to work this new problem. You can't seem to understand what the book is saying. You keep getting more and more frustrated. So finally, you shut the book, you walk away, and when you get your mind off of that problem that you were stuck on, you are opening up that very different diffuse mode of thinking, that mind-wandering mode. You can't think in the careful, focused way you can when you're in the focused mode, but you can at least do some background consolidation so that later, when you return to the focused mode, it suddenly makes sense. Learning involves going back and forth between focused and diffuse mode. You cannot be in both modes at the same time on the same topic unless you are taking some mushrooms, and I have not. Okay, yeah, really, that's kind of a fun trip, but otherwise. So anyway, this is, if I had known about this when I was a little kid, and I was trying to solve those first multiplication problems, I just thought, well, I can't do it right away like these kids who are far advanced from me, so I must be stupid. And I didn't know anything about how it's perfectly okay not to be able to solve something the first time when you're trying. You just let it sit a little bit and then return to it. And if someone had taught me this when I was young, it would have been almost like a vaccination. When I got really frustrated, my dad could have said, oh, this is time for you to back away. And this is what we can also be teaching children, to back away, when they need to, and take a little break. And that way they can be a little bit less intense and angry at themselves when they can't figure out a problem. So let's see. I was going to do, you want to do a little breakout group? Okay, so we're gonna do a 4-minute breakout group, and what I want you to do is I want you to turn hopefully to someone you don't know, and I would like you to introduce yourselves. So like 2, 3, or 4 people, quickly introduce yourselves, and then describe the difference between focused and diffuse modes, and then give maybe an example or two. So you've got, let's see, 3 to 4 minutes on your mark, set, go. Do you realize what I was doing right here? I was giving you a diffuse mode break. So, and you know, did you kind of feel it when I said, okay, I want you to take a little break and work with someone near you? Did you feel inside it was like, whew, I get to relax for a little bit? Because holding your attention on someone, even no matter how good it is, can sometimes be a little bit taxing. I mean, if it's pure entertainment, you can watch it all day. But education is sometimes a little bit harder, no matter how we want to slice it. Daphne Bavelier, the great researcher, often likens education and entertainment is kind of like mixing broccoli and chocolate. How do you do it so it tastes good? It's a little hard. So anyone have a note or did they come up with something that was kind of interesting involving focused and diffuse that they'd like to share? No? Everyone's a little quiet. Okay. So so I do want to give you a little sense of how to metaphorically think of students who may have challenges with their attentional systems. So, like sometimes my husband, he has a little challenge with attention sometimes. I'll be talking with him and he's like, oh, look at that squirrel, you know. So, but he can't help it. Things will just kind of attract his attention. And what is happening is it's kind of like you've got holes in that pinball table, the focus mode, and then it's your mind falls into that mind wandering, whether you like it or not. Now, the good thing about this is that having a little ADHD can help make you more creative, because this mode is really affiliated. You can see it's like making broad connections that you might not have thought of before. So is ADHD kind of a pain sometimes? Yes, but it can give you gifts that actually some other people would really give a lot to be able to have. So also, it's nice to think, so like here I had to put this picture on because it's just so colorful and beautiful. This is at the Turgar Monastery in Nepal. And meditation they've been working for thousands of years to really understand and try to take advantage of some of these different modes of the brain. So focus mode forms of meditation, like mantra meditation, that is like focus mode. And then the open monitoring or kinds of meditation like mindfulness, that often is a little bit more affiliated with the default mode network, that diffuse way of thinking. So there is tradition that really supports what neuroscience is finding. Now, a big problem for many students, and for adults as well, of course, is procrastination. And procrastination arises because when we even just think about something we don't like or don't want to do, it activates a portion of the brain that experiences pain, the insular cortex. So what our brain kind of does is, we think about something we don't like, and we turn our attention to something more interesting, and we feel happier almost instantly. The only thing is we've just procrastinated. So you do it once or twice, not a big deal. But if you do it a lot, you can end up even thinking, oh, there's no way I can be successful in studying whatever it is. And it's not that you don't have the talent. It's simply that you procrastinated so long and so often that few people can learn under those kinds of conditions. So the best way to handle procrastination is using a technique called the Pomodoro. And I'm going to give you a modern twist on the Pomodoro. So, Pomodoro technique, a lot of people now know about this. It was invented by an Italian, Francesco Cirillo, in the early 1980s. And it involves turning off all distractions. You sit there, no cell phones, no pop-ups on your computer screen. Set a timer for 25 minutes. And that 25 minutes, that's just sort of, it doesn't have to be a hard and fast rule. You can keep going if you would like, or you can make it longer or shorter. If you're working with younger children, you may want to make it shorter. And then you focus as intently as you can for 25 minutes. It's like a working meditation. If your mind wanders, you bring it back. And then what you do is you reward yourself. But here's how you reward yourself. First, take 2 to 3 minutes, close your eyes, and retrieve what you have just learned. What were the key ideas? Pull them to mind. Then put everything away and then just relax and do nothing for a final 2 to 3 minutes. That final 2 to 3, so what are you going to want to do when I say do nothing? Well, isn't that time to pick up your cell phone? Do not pick up your cell phone. So 2 to 3 minutes of nothing. You just sit there. Okay, if you have a cat, you can pet your cat. If you want to make a cup of tea, you can make a cup of tea. If it's mindless stuff, you can do mindless sort of stuff that you do habitually. But what that is doing, that 2 to 3 minutes where you're just kind of sitting there doing nothing and not really having any input coming in from your working memory, that is time when your brain tags what you've just learned. All those little connections, your brain puts in little tags when you have nothing coming in, and it puts those tags in, and then at night when you go to sleep, you have traveling waves going around your brain, and those traveling waves are looking for those tags. And when it sees them, it says, tagged material, this is important, I'm going to reinforce it. So that period where you're just letting your brain sit is the tagging time, and then during the sleep period, it reinforces. So if you use these modern little tweaks and additions to your Pomodoro, you will remember, you'll make even better use of that focusing time of the Pomodoro. So sometimes people like to do 4 Pomodoros followed by a half an hour break, and that works pretty well. Now, I do want to say, since we've mentioned sleep, look at this. This is a dendrite. There's the rest of the neuron is way out there, And there's the leg of the neuron, and there's those little toes, the dendritic spines. This is before learning and before sleep. Now, this is after learning and after sleep. So look, this is so cool. Now, look right up here, there's nothing. But after sleep, there's a new dendritic spine that emerged. And look at this. You can see up above, it didn't have much of an ending at all. Now it's got like a very large head on that dendritic spine. In fact, sleep is a lot, that is really important for the learning process. So when I'm talking about tagging during the day to reinforce during sleep, that's what I'm talking about. These dendritic spines will create really nice new connections after you've learned and gone to sleep. And this applies even for naps during the day. So it's important to space out your learning. So, you want to, like, if you have 5 hours, do 1 hour a day for 5 days. Don't do like 5 hours in one day, because if you do that, it's very weak connections that are easily swept away. This way, if you spend like an hour a day, you spend an hour studying, then it's reinforced during sleep. Another hour studying, reinforced. You're getting like twice the bang for your buck by spacing out that learning and also using sleep. It's a little like building a brick wall. You layer bricks, mortar, bricks. It takes time to build that wall, but you have a good solid structure of learning. If you don't do that, you've got kind of a lousy foundation for whatever you're trying to learn. Now, very quickly, we'll go over working memory, long-term memory, and octopuses, because they all connect to one another. So working memory is like what you hold temporarily in mind. And you can typically hold, they say, 4 pieces of information, typically. And people often say, what do you mean by a piece of information? Well, it depends. Like, I can hold a piece of information like the zdravstvуй. I can remember lots of things in Russian because I have prior knowledge of Russian. So I can hold 4 big pieces of information in my brain about that. I can hold 4 big pieces in English about that. I can hold, like, let's see, Wocha Baijo. I can hold very little Mandarin in my mind because I have no prior information about that. But anyway, so working memory is mostly in the prefrontal cortex. It holds information temporarily, whereas long-term memory is more like a set of lockers, and in those lockers are sets of links. So they're scattered around your brain. And when you're learning something, your working memory is creating those sets of links, and you practice with them, store them in long-term memory, and later, whenever you need those links, you can reach out and grab them. And this brings me to my younger daughter, Rachel. And so I asked Rachel to model for us what it felt like when she was first learning to back up a car. And so here's Rachel. She's like backing up the car, and she's like, which way do I turn? Do I look this way? Do I look that way? And then off she goes into the ditch. And what was happening was when Rachel was first learning to back up that car, her working memory was it was overwhelmed. She had a heavy cognitive load, and all of those arms were taken up with learning. But once she learned how to back up the car, all she had to do was think, I want to back up the car. And she can pull those links to mind. She's got a light cognitive load, so she can even think about other things with those arms, like, are my seatbelts fastened, and what's the song on the radio? And ultimately, we want, if for a student, or we want our students to just be able to hop down when we give a test, and they can pull those links out of long-term memory and put them together creatively to solve a problem we might have asked them to solve. Now, sometimes though, what students, if they don't know that retrieval practice is really important, they can sit down to the test and they haven't really asked themselves, do I know this? By checking with retrieval practice. And they sit down, and for the first time on the test, they realize there's nothing there in long-term memory. And they go to you and they say, I knew the material better than it shows on the test, and I just suffer from test anxiety. So that's actually not true. I mean, the real problem is we haven't taught them how to learn effectively. So I want to show you now how you have a large language model in your own brain. And that's like ChatGPT. And I talked about these links in long-term memory. And those links can be laid through two different pathways, and they have two different characteristics. So the first pathway takes information from working memory through the hippocampus into long-term memory, and that's called the declarative pathway, because you can declare it. It's really, this is the pathway of lecture. So when I'm lecturing to you, it's going into your working memory, through your little hippocampuses, and into long-term memory. And are you learning anything this way? I hope. So oftentimes, educators have been telling us over the last 30 years that students actively create their own knowledge and lecture is bad. Is that really true? Would you have learned nearly as much as if I walked in here and I said, okay, now I want you to get into groups and think about what learning really is, and then explain it to me? Would you have learned nearly as much as what you've just gotten through this very, very carefully prepared lecture? So there's something a little odd going on in educational theory, that they would throw out half the way that we learn effectively. And there's another way, though, that we learn, and that's through that automatic pathway, which goes through the basal ganglia, which is my favorite part of the brain. So feel free to read Haggai Bergman's Hidden Life of the Basal Ganglia, which is full of exciting revelations about this intriguing part of the brain. But anyway, this is the pathway of habits. So when you do something habitually, like you drive home and then you don't know how you got home, and you wonder, how could I have gotten home? And I'm not even aware of how I did it. You did it because of the habitual links of the basal ganglia. And both links are really important for our learning, but it's also, let's look at this a little bit differently. See this blue box? That's the declarative box. It's declarative learning. And this, has anyone heard of the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow? So this is the slow way of thinking. And the fast way of thinking is that automatic, so that's represented by that orange box. Okay, so let's play a game together. Okay, I'm going to point. You tell me whether it's fast or slow. Fast. You got it. Okay. Okay, so there we go. So let's break things out a little bit. When we're working on a math problem, we are conscious of it. Our working memory kind of says to our hippocampus, okay, step through the math problem. And you're aware of what you're learning and figuring out. But there's that other way of learning through the basal ganglia, and you are not aware of how you learn this way. So watch. Your working memory kind of says, not consciously, to your basal ganglia. It says something like, hit the baseball. You hit the baseball, you see the result. Oh, the ball went off that way. But you don't know how your brain is knowing how to hit that baseball. In fact, you hit it again and again, but you don't know how your brain is learning to hit the baseball, even though you're actually learning to hit the baseball better. What is the magic behind this basal ganglia? It is a deep neural net. And this net, each one of these circles is a neuron. And those lines are a dendrite, an axon, dendritic spine, dendrite, leading to the next neuron. When you tell yourself, okay, hit that baseball, you send a signal through, you hit it, but you're not conscious of how you're hitting that baseball. You hit it again, and then you hit it again, and you are strengthening some of these connections, and you're weakening others, and this is how you learn physical and motor skills. But there's more. It's also how you learn your native language. Our little granddaughter, she learns to speak. She's like, mom, 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 mom. And my daughter gets all excited. She said, mama. And so actually, you make these sounds, you get feedback, and that is precisely how we learn our native language. But it's more. It's also how we learn the patterns of things. Like when you learn the multiplication tables by heart, you are learning it as a youngster through this system, and it gives you a feel for the numbers and how they relate to one another. So these two different learning systems learn very differently. This one needs lots of practice. It needs a lot of repetition, but then it can see patterns in marvelous ways. Those on the autistic spectrum tend to have very strong basal ganglia ways of learning, which means they can see patterns. They can look at numbers and look at code, instantly see where an error is, whereas those with dyslexia can have a very strong hippocampal system. So this basal ganglia system gets weaker as you grow towards teenagerhood. This system gets stronger. That's why it's harder as you get older to learn to speak a language like a native speaker does, because that's sort of the native speaker, that's what allows you to learn to speak like a native. But you can still learn a language as an adult. You're just using this slower system. So interestingly, this is how large language models like ChatGPT are trained. Now imagine if you are always going off and looking up numbers or looking up anything because people tell you, you don't need to remember things, you can always just look it up. What that means is you're not creating the patterns. You're not like getting inside you a feel for what is truly going on. And so you can't really be as effective in your learning. So let's see, so where are we right at? I think this is really a very good way a place for us to leave off, because I'd really love to hear your questions this afternoon. But keep in mind, you have a large language model within your own head. It needs its own training. And as we all know, AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. If you would like to get the slides of this presentation, which have like way more slides than I was able to talk about today, please pull them off of this survey here. And also, there's a much deeper paper called the Memory Paradox. So if you're interested in AI and the brain, I highly recommend that paper, which is one of the most popular downloads on SSRN right now. So with that, I would like to thank you so very much.